I make no secret that I'm a libertarian, but I think it's important for me to nail my colors to the mast. I am a Rothbardian anarcho-capitalist. Specifically, I do think of myself as a Blockian anarcho-capitalist, but he was a Rothbardian. I'm gonna make another video about limited government versus anarchy, but that'll be in the future. For now, this video is about, is taxation theft? But a starting place is necessary before I even begin. For one, you need to look up the video, Can You Delegate a Right You Don't Have? Government is Magic. It is precisely 6 minutes 18 seconds long. Once you have finished watching it and it looks like this, come back to this video because we have to have a basis and a foundation upon which to start. The question asked repeatedly in the video is, can you delegate a right that you don't have? And actually think about it. You don't work at my job, I don't work at your job. I can say to you, here, friend, here is my money, or use my property. I cannot say to one of my friends, hey, use this person's money or property because I would be delegating a right that I don't have. So, if I don't have the right, if I don't have the ability to use your property without your consent and permission, where does government get that right and why do they have the right to tax us? In the words of one conservative, all taxation is a gangster shakedown. I know that was a bad impression. I didn't talk fast enough. I don't know exactly what you're thinking right now, but I do have a few ideas. But Josh, every civilization since before the Roman Empire has had some form of taxation. There's a reason why we fund the government. How would essential services like the military, the police, the fire department be funded? If you make taxation voluntary, there would be a huge problem with freeloaders. Who would build the roads? I shall answer this question shortly, but first we need to separate the argument into really two pieces, that of morality and that of utility. First of all, is taxation moral or immoral? And the utility argument is, if it is evil, is it a necessary evil because there is no other alternative? This is why this video is so important. Ask yourself, can you delegate a right that you do not have? Most importantly,
you cannot tax your neighbor, but you can authorize me as your senator to vote for a program that will tax your neighbor.
It's interesting to me how it is that the agent can have more power than the principal. If the principals are the people, and the source comes from the people, and the individuals do not have the right to initiate force against others, I would suppose...
As individuals.
Well, if they get together, then all of a sudden they have the right?
What is taxation? Money taken from me in order to pay for something. So what is the difference if a simple robber, a common thief, walks up to me and says, give me your money, and someone else doing it? To me, whether the man has no badge and is a common thief, or a tax collector, it is irrelevant. In either case, my money is being taken away from me. If I do not have the right to take money from you, how can you or how can we collectively delegate that right to the government? We cannot delegate rights that we do not have. I can hand you my debit card and tell you, hey, head down to the local corner mart and buy me a Reese's peanut butter cup. I cannot hand you my friend's debit card without his knowledge and consent and say, hey, here's my card, run down and buy me a Reese's peanut butter cup. That would be a delegation of a right that I do not have. Apart from taxation, but the example still holds, I cannot walk into your house uninvited without your permission and say, what, this is my house, I am allowed to walk in here. That is a right I do not have. I cannot also tell a friend of mine, hey, come into my house, here's the address. That is a delegation of a right that I do not have. So, this is apart from taxation, but bear it in mind, why are people breaking and entering people's houses and searching for plants and for chemicals? Where does the government get this right? I am not going to spend much more time on the morality argument because I often don't hear moral arguments. I have yet to hear or to engage in a debate with statists about this topic where there's not some combination of trying to conflate or bring together two things that shouldn't be brought together, as in the argument of morality and that of utility. They will talk about the morality of it, and then whenever I try to prove that morally it is wrong to take something that is not yours, they hop to utility. And then when I try to offer up an idea of how things could be paid for voluntarily, then it hops back to, well, no, because taxation is good and moral. But we have to draw this distinction. This is why I've done so in this video. There is one argument of morality and one of utility. But eventually, I am accepted as correct that technically government does not have the right. However, the follow-up is almost always utilitarian in nature. So let us go back to the first objection. Every civilization, since before the Roman Empire, has had some form of taxation. There's a reason why we fund the government. That's the way it's always been done is neither a persuasive argument nor a particularly complex one. If you take that far enough, nothing would ever get done, nothing would progress. And something that is eerily similar to this is, yes, these people over here are not people, they are labor-saving devices, and that's how it's always been done. Morality changed. People realized that slavery was wrong and evil. I want people, likewise, to realize that government is immoral because it steals from us. Morality has changed before. It used to be acceptable to simply cut off people's hands whenever they stole, or to stone people for talking back to their parents. Morality changes. It was also considered scandalous to have skirts above the knee. Morality and culture and times change. I would echo what the Ancient One says in the movie Doctor Strange. No, he couldn't walk. I convinced him that he could. We can convince ourselves to walk. Walk away from tyrannical government. Walk away from slavery. Walk away from stealing, legalized theft, legal plunder. We can fund a governing system voluntarily. And if government is so great and strong and moral, why does it rely on stealing? How would essential services, like the military, the police, the fire department, be funded? I will go into this in greater detail, but for now, I want to show you something quite simple. Look at this simple graph/roadmap. Is taxation necessary? Name a government program or service that is paid for by taxes. Is it really important? No. Then we should not be forced to pay for it. Is it really important? Yes. Would you pay for it even if you were not forced to? No. Is it really important? Would you pay for it even if you were not forced to? Yes. Then it does not require taxation and can be privately funded. The biggest problem that I see here would be question 3 regarding freeloaders. But first, let's look at some options when it comes to the other things, when it comes to things such as courts, national defense, and police. There are already more private police officers than there are government police officers in this country. The good thing about private solutions every time is you can fire the private company. You cannot fire a government employee. It is usually very, very hard to fire someone. I even have acquaintances and friends that work for the government. They're basically unfireable, and they admit it proudly. Whereas with a private investigator, a private police officer, you can fire them if they were to commit a horrible crime, such as the George Floyd kneeling. But what about courts? Milton Friedman's son, David Friedman, talks about this extensively in his book, The Machinery of Freedom. He also does talks of this where you can find them on Facebook. He talks often about rights enforcement agencies, in which I go to my court, you go to your court, and we agree to meet another court. If, however, we cannot come to an agreement, the result could be war. However, wars are very expensive. In this case, they are incentivized to come to a peaceful solution in which I am happy, for if I am not, I will no longer pay this court, will go to another court, and they lose my business. This is a series of incentives. As Milton Friedman, his own father, said, what you incentivize, you get more of. These courts will be incentivized that they will win when you win, because they will have your continued business to solve your problems in a private arbitration system, which another economist, Brian Kaplan, often talks about. Brian Kaplan also talks about, envision what we have now, but we continue to build on them. And I have to be frank, When it comes to national defense, David Friedman admits, we're not sure. We're not sure what the exact future would look like if it's built voluntarily. But there's wonderful freedom in that. It could look like anything. You could have militaries that are very huge and expensive, but if the world is relatively peaceful, we don't need nukes anymore. And this is because there is peace. We are incentivized, using economics, to do well when you do well. We are not going to bomb our customers. We are not going to bomb the people that we are allowed to trade with worldwide. This is one of the problems when it comes to trade wars. We get mad. There is a Cold War when it comes to trading, and we don't really hurt if we bomb our competition or our customer. But if we're all trading internationally, you're not going to bomb your customer, and war becomes more expensive than it already is. If you make taxation voluntary, there would be a huge problem with freeloaders. Going back to what Brian Kaplan says about let's just expand on what we already have. What happens if you try to freeload in a sense and just refuse to pay your water bill or your electric bill or anything of that sort? What happens? They come out and turn off your power, or they'll come out and turn off your water. What about things like roads? Think about private police. They could recognize that you have not been paying this and therefore are not allowed to drive on this road without paying something, similar to a toll road of sorts. I'm off to the next project, but if you're still wondering about morality or utility when it comes to taxation, here's an excerpt from For a New Liberty by Murray Rothbard. This is in Chapter 2 under the heading Society and the Individual. We have talked at length of individual rights, but what, it may be asked, of the rights of society? Don't they supersede the rights of the mere individual? The libertarian, however, is an individualist. He believes that one of the prime errors in social theory is to treat society as if it were an actually existing entity. Society is sometimes treated as a superior or quasi-divine figure with overriding rights of its own, at other times as an existing evil which can be blamed for all the ills of the world. The individualist holds that only individuals exist, think, feel, choose, and act, and that society is not a living entity but simply a label for a set of interacting individuals. Treating society as a thing that chooses and acts, then, serves to obscure the real forces at work. If, in a small community, 10 people band together to rob and expropriate 3 others, then this is clearly and evidently a case of a group of individuals acting in concert against another group. In this situation, if the 10 people presumed to refer to themselves as society acting in its interest, the rationale would be laughed out of court. Even the 10 robbers would probably be too shamefaced to use this kind of argument. But let their size increase, and this kind of obfuscation becomes rife and succeeds in duping the public. The fallacious use of a collective noun like nation, similar to this respect to society, has been trenchantly pointed out by the historian Parker T. Moon. When one uses the simple monosyllable France, one thinks of France as a unit, an entity. When we say France sent her troops to conquer Tunis, we impute not only unit but personality to the country. The very words conceal the facts and make international relations a glamorous drama in which personalized nations are the actors, and all too easily we forget the flesh and blood women and men who are the true actors. If we had no such word as France, then we should more accurately describe the Tunis expedition in some such way as this: a few of these 38 million persons sent 30,000 others to conquer Tunis. This way of putting the fact immediately suggests a question, or rather, a series of questions. Who were the few? And why did they send the 30,000 to Tunis? And why did these obey? Empire building is done not by nations, but by men. The problem before us is to discover the men, the active, interested minorities in each nation, who are directly interested in imperialism, and then to analyze the reasons why the majorities paid the expense and fight the war necessitated by imperialist expansion. End quote. This is now Rothbard talking again. The individualist view of society has been summed up in the phrase, society is everyone but yourself. Put thus bluntly, this analysis can be used to consider those cases where society is treated not only as a superhero with super rights, but as a supervillain on whose shoulders massive blame is placed. Consider the typical view that not the individual criminal, but society, is responsible for his crime. Take, for example, the case where Smith robs or murders Jones. The old-fashioned view is that Smith is responsible for his act. The modern liberal counters that society is responsible. This sounds both sophisticated and humanitarian, until we apply the individualist perspective. Then we see that what liberals are really saying is that everyone but Smith, including, of course, the victim Jones, is responsible for the crime. Put this baldly, almost everyone would recognize the absurdity of this position. But conjuring up the fictive entity society obfuscates this process. As the sociologist Arnold W. Green puts it, it would follow then that if society is responsible for crime and criminals are not responsible for crime, only those members of society who do not commit crime can be held responsible for crime. Nonsense this obvious can be circumvented only by conjuring up society as devil, as evil being apart from people and what they do. End quote. This is Rothbard talking again. The great American libertarian writer Frank Chodorov stressed this view of society when he wrote that society are people. This is Chodorov talking. Society is a collective concept and nothing else. It is convenience for designating a group of people. So too is family or crowd or gang or any other name that we give to an agglomeration of persons. Society is not an extra person. If the census totals 100 million, that's all there are. Not one more, for there cannot be any accretion to society except by procreation. The concept of society as a metaphysical person falls flat when we observe that society appears when the component parts disperse, as in the case of a ghost town, or of a civilization we learn about by the artifacts they left behind. When the individuals disappear, so does the whole. The whole has no separate existence. Using the collective noun with a singular verb leads us into a trap of the imagination. We are prone to personalize the collectivity and to think of it as having a body and a psyche of its own. Unquote.